Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Jeannie Davison and I'm the Industry Development Manager at Screenworks. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first of our Gender Matters webinars, which we're excited to be hosting in collaboration with Screen Australia and the Gender Matters Task Force. As a national organisation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including those joining us for our webinar today, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And in particular, I'd like to pay my respects to the Nyambul people of the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land in the Ballina region, where I'm speaking to you from today. So now it's my very great pleasure to hand you over to our facilitator, Lois Randall.
Hi everybody, welcome to this Screenworks webinar. I'm a producer based in the Northern Rivers region as well. I'm also in Bundjalung country, and I'm a producer primarily of drama, and I'm really happy to be the facilitator of this really exciting Gender Matters initiative. So it's great to see so many people joining us from all over Australia, and I hope that we'll be able to get a chance to answer everybody's questions. But first, we've got four really fabulous speakers joining us today. And first up, I'm thrilled to introduce Nikki Tran. Nikki is a writer and a producer based in Melbourne, drawn to stories from underrepresented cultures and voices on our screens. Her producing credits include ABC's Factual Conversation series, Can You Hear Me? And that was produced entirely online during lockdown, so that was an amazing achievement. Also, the ACTA-nominated bilingual comedy Girl Interrupted and the workplace dramedy Fresh. Nikki's creative practice has received development support through Film Victoria, Screen Australia, Footscray Community Art Centre, and the State Library of Victoria's Creative Fellowship, and also from Malthouse Theatre. She recently interned at Film Victoria, ABC and Matchbox Pictures in the script development as part of the inaugural Film Victoria screen development internship, and I hope you'll tell us a little bit about that experience today as well. So welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I can't see any of you. So I tend to ramble, so I've got notes on the side here to keep me on track. But I guess career-wise, I'm still considered emerging in the industry. So I guess I'll talk a bit about my experience and how I got my foot in the door and how I got started. Previously I've done a lot of community work, and I've done a lot of online web series content work, and currently I'm working part-time in scripted drama development in TV land. So I started my journey going through film school. I did bachelor's in communication and then a master's in producing. And what was great about uni was it gave me all those creative skills and those story skills, and it gave me collaborative skills, and I got to meet a few very close friends that I'm collaborators with now, one of which I'm starting a production company with. But what it couldn't really teach me enough was the reality of working in the industry, and especially as a producer, understanding that business side of things, which is why a lot of you are here today, I guess. And anything that dealt with real money was really elusive to me. I came out of uni thinking that I knew a lot, but I actually knew nothing, and I didn't know what I didn't know. So I found it difficult to find a job, which is not unusual for graduates, even as a paid runner or an unpaid observer in a writer's room. And I think a few things that helped me get started was that I was in a very privileged situation to be living at home with my parents, so I wasn't paying rent. I had a flexible part-time job outside of the industry, working in university admin, and I was able to take time off to do my creative projects, and they were supportive of that. And so I took savings and funneled it into a web series. I self-funded a web series because I thought if no one will give me a chance, then I guess I'll just make my own stories that I want to watch. I wrote it and I co-produced it with a mate from film school, and it was, no one was paid. It was all a passion project. So I was really grateful for everyone who volunteered their time. And it was inspired by my community, and it ended up acting as a calling card, I guess, for the stories I wanted to tell in my voice. Ken, if you don't mind playing the trailer for Fresh.
Hello?
No one cares that I work for you.
Nice jacket. There are things wiggling
Linda,
here.
they're organic.
I quit.
I have to go.
No.
Yes.
You know my sister Aisha.
No, I'm not going anywhere.
No.
He's sagging. Not that it matters. Because all I do is come here and see other sorry sacks anyway.
Yeah, so this was a web series that was 6 episodes, about 5 minutes each. It was filmed over a year and a half. And through making this web series, we were able to kind of reach out to different people in the industry of web series filmmakers that we were asking for advice on how they did it and how they released their web series. It was a form of networking, but we had sort of a reason to get in touch and approach people to talk about a project we were working on, instead of, I guess it's harder when you're approaching someone and asking them for a job or asking them to be part of their projects. So it was a good way to, I guess, be more visible in the industry as creatives, but also talk about the work that we're doing and what we wanted to make too. And at the same time, for me, there were these initiatives and programs rolling out that were addressing the diversity problem we had in our industry. So I applied to a few of those, and one of which was the AFTRS, Screen Australia and Film Vic Talent Camp. It was one that ran in every state and territory, so it wasn't just in Victoria. And I really encourage anyone who's from an underrepresented background to apply for that program if it ever comes up again, because it was really useful to me. It was like a week of workshops that kind of went through how to develop, how to pitch, how to, it gave you resources and tools to finance your project as well. For anyone who was outside of the industry and wanted to get in, or someone who was from an emerging background as well. So yeah, and I think, don't quote me on it, but travel was covered for regional participants as well. And one of the most valuable things I got out of that was actually being able to meet other creatives in that program. Because it was just so rare to find people of color in screen, for me anyway, because we all sometimes work in silos. And I was able to make really great friends out of that program. And in the end, I ended up collaborating with a writer and director who was pitching a web series there. And I produced the web series called Girl Interpreted. Yes, can you play the trailer for Girl Interpreted as well?
Don't be alarmed. The side effect of a dry orgasm only happens to very few people.
你是不是喝多了，还是嗑药了吗？
谁说的？
谁说的？
you.
你呀，我。It's kind of like a Shakespeare sonnet, but in Mandarin. I'm
Tell
sure
me
you don't need
exactly what she said.
I don't want to get back together with you. Listen.
直男是个新的词，就是像你这样子的男人。
你凭什么说我有直男？
好，
啊！
别婆婆，不要打他，孙子，兔崽子。
How? Is that correct, Lillian?
So this was a project that ended up being funded, and it was my first funded project that I worked on. I was able to work with a mentor, Stuart Menzies, on the project, who's worked with Joe on the Newsreader, and he was a producer of The Cry as well. So it was a kind of, another web series that I did, but it was a step up for me as well, because there were all these things I learned to do industry standard, but on a baby scale, because it was funded by Screen Australia and Film Vic and Afters. And then from there, I developed a relationship with Film Victoria, and things kind of snowballed, which is how I got into the industry. But it was nice, I think, to be able to develop a relationship with people in the industry through those programs, especially with Film Victoria, because I think it's hard as someone who's emerging. Sometimes we do feel quite invisible, first starting out and not knowing where to go. Just feel like you're stumbling around in the dark, but being able to take those programs and then through making web series, slowly, incrementally take those steps into the film industry. It was, yeah, that's how I got my start in the industry. So I encourage people to apply for programs that come up through Film Victoria and Screen Australia, and I'd be happy to speak to anyone who needs advice with those. That's it from me.
Thanks so much, Nikki, and apologise, I mispronounced the name of Girl Interpreted. There's a feature film, I think Boy Interrupted, and I think I said Girl Interrupted. So Girl Interpreted looks fantastic, and congratulations on your pathway into the industry and the great work that you've been doing. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later on about pathways and just how people can get started. Our next speaker is Jodie Bell. Jodie is a First Nations descendant of the Butchulla and Jagera people of Southeast Queensland, and is CEO and head producer for Ramu Productions, a community-owned production company in Broome in Western Australia. Jodie has produced a number of productions, including short films telling our story, In the Air, the WASA-nominated Mark Morduck, which is a beautiful film, Fishing, Yallaroo, Doug the Human, First Time Home, and the award-winning short documentaries Naji, Murray Murrigan, and Saving Seagrass, as well as the well-received documentary series Characters of Broome and the Ridgicaba for NITV. And we're so lucky to have you with us today, Jodie. Jodie was also the co-producer of the amazing Cinefest Oz 2015 Film of the Year, Putipuri and the Rainmakers. And in 2019, she joined the Cinefest Oz team as the Indigenous Film Coordinator. She's currently in development on a number of projects, including a documentary series, a feature film, and a television series. Thank you so much for being with us today, Jodie.
Thanks, Lois. And I'd like to thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming on today with us for our webinar. It's really strange. I'm looking at talking to 124 people, but can't actually see you, so it feels a bit bizarre. So first, I'd just like to acknowledge the Yawuru people, who are the traditional owners of the country where I live and work, which is in Broome, Western Australia, in the northwest corner of WA. And yeah, and I'd also like to acknowledge all Indigenous people that are on today, and traditional owners of the countries where you're all sitting. And thank you to ScreenWorks for having me on today. Like Nikki, I've got some notes, so I hope I'll just roll through them. I do tend to, when I get carried away, talk too fast, so please just someone stop me if I am. So my name is Jodie Bell. I'm an Indigenous producer. I'm a Butchulla Jagera woman from Southeast Queensland, but I've lived and worked in Yawuru country for the last 13 years, but I've lived in WA since I was like 4 years old or something, so I consider myself a Western Australian. As Lois said, I manage a company called Ramari Productions, which is an Indigenous community-owned production company. We are actually owned by a community organisation called the Broome Aboriginal Media Association, which was set up in the mid-80s by a number of Indigenous musicians that came out of Broome. So in sort of the early Brand New Day type days, Jimmy Chai, the Pigram Brothers, all those sort of people, Mark Bimbaka, and they were finding that they couldn't hear their music. They were getting little opportunities to play. They were getting little opportunities to hear their music and get their music out. So they sort of started a bit of a co-op, which became the Broome Aboriginal Musicians Association. And out of that became the Broome Aboriginal Media Association. So they wanted to hear themselves on the radio. And so they formed together to get a radio license. Then they wanted to see themselves on screen. So they then created a media company called Galari Media. So it's like the operational company. And Galari owns a community television license here in Broome, as well as the radio license. And then out of that, over the years, we've also then created a production company. So more and more as time got on, we realised that Indigenous people need to tell our own stories rather than have people coming in to tell our stories for us. So that's how the company got created. I fell into being a producer. So unlike Nikki and probably the other ladies that are on today, I haven't done any formal training as such. I actually came to Galari with a background of managing community organisations in remote communities. So I'd been living out in Fitzroy Crossing and managed an organisation that managed sort of housing, employment, health, everything basically for Indigenous people in the Fitzroy Valley, and was looking for a sea change and got asked to come to Galari to take on a new position around business development. So Galari at the time had got some funding through the state government and had put on a producer to produce content for our television station, as well as move us into sort of more mainstream content to go onto mainstream platforms. And I came on to sort of work with her as a business development person to basically find money. And she ended up leaving not long after she started. She was in the middle of making a documentary that ended up being quite successful and got pulled back to the East Coast. And so at the time, the managing director of our company said, not having any idea what he was talking about, basically said, being a producer is just the business end of the deal. So you can do that because you've got a business brain. And so I ended up taking on both jobs and ended up becoming a producer. And so I pretty much learned on the job. I'd never had thought of myself as really creative in my own mind, but I've learnt over the years. So I've been doing this job now for 12 years. I've learnt that I actually do have a little streak of creativity, but I can also understand the business side of it a lot, which really, really helps. And so, yes, that's how I became a producer. I would say though, in 2015, I think it was, and for any Indigenous emerging producers that are on the webinar, look out for this. Screen Australia ran an Indigenous producers program. So they've had about 3 or 4 now, I think, over the years. So I was in the second or third lot, I can't remember. They run them every couple of years. It's a really intensive year-long program, but that gave me so much skills and understanding of stuff that I thought I understood, but I didn't really. So if you can ever get yourself into initiatives like that, they are like some of the best initiatives you can get into, and they teach you so much because you get matched up with mentors, you get to meet people in all different levels of production companies, all different levels of productions. So you work with people on web series, on TV, on films, docos, drama, narrative. We did like weeks and weeks just of how to unpack scripts and how to unpack stories, and worked with all these different creative producers, script producers, just to understand story better. So the idea was to give us the skills to become creative producers, not just a business head. So yeah, I did that. So our company, we obviously based in Broome, is very remote. We are often, I'm always having this argument about, you should come down to the East Coast, you should come down to Sydney to live, you should come down to Melbourne to live, you should come down to Perth to live. And my thing is no, I want to be able to do what I do where I do it from. My family's here, my home's here. I don't want to leave. I'm more than happy to jump on a plane, and anyone that knows me knows that I'm just the travel queen. I'm constantly on and off planes. Well, apart from the last 12 months, which has been a very new experience for me. But yeah, so I don't believe you have to be in those cities to have a career and to produce content and to make things work and to access funding, to access finance and all those things. And I think if anything that's been taught to us over the last 18 months is that so much can actually get done by Zoom. You don't have to be in that office. Of course, it's nice when you can go down the street and have a cup of coffee with somebody and have a chat about something, which then might lead to a finance deal or whatever. But you can just as easily do that on the phone. And I think when you do get the opportunities to then actually mix with people and network, you do it a lot better. You take it, you really make it targeted and make it work for you. So I suppose that's what I would say is that if you are living regional remote, don't ever get pulled into that you have to be in the city to make your career work, because you don't. There are ways and means around doing that. For me personally, I couldn't do what I do without having the support of my family, and to have that support, I need to be here with my family. In terms of projects, obviously it does impact our projects. When we do a lot of shooting in Broome, I would say on par with a very similar project, say that's running out of Perth, we would probably have an extra 20-25% just in travel costs, because we don't have enough crew here. I do have a small crew on staff, so like a camera and director, editor, a soundy, but we can do basic stuff. But the minute we're trying to do a bigger production, we obviously need to bring in crew, and that costs money. So that is one of the impacts you do have. We're very lucky in Western Australia with the advent of the Regional Film Fund 4 years ago. That's sort of been brought around to help regional production companies. It also brings, obviously, bringing jobs into the regions, but it also then helps regional production companies produce content. So, and I don't know that other states have that, but I'm sure there might be some regional things. And in WA, in the production formula, so when you apply for funding, there's like a point system. You can tick certain boxes, which gets you a certain level of funding. Working in regional areas is one of those boxes, so that gives you a little bit extra funding just automatically anyway. But it is something to think about. And I suppose for us at Ramu and Galari, we got about because we basically wanted to be in control of telling our stories, Indigenous stories, and that's what we're all about, is telling Indigenous stories. And we're very firm believers in making sure that they're authentic stories. So I do a lot of sort of consulting. We really hate that word, but if a production company is coming into our turf or into our country, and I have got some aspect of Indigenous elements in their story, we will say, well, we need to be there to make sure you're getting that right. And so more and more we're trying to push, especially it depends on each project. But if you start getting a project where it's quite a significant amount of Indigenous story, we actually push and say, well, no, actually you need to bring us on board in a meaningful way as a co-producer, and bring in Indigenous key creatives and that sort of thing to make your story happen, or else we're just not going to support it. And if you don't get our support, then good luck trying to get support out of Screen West and those sort of agencies with that much Indigenous content and no Indigenous input into your story. So that's what we're about. We also are about supporting emerging writers and getting Indigenous practitioners off the ground. So we run a lot of development initiatives. When Lois was reading out my bio, I do a lot of short films and things like that, because we're all about trying to give the wings to fly to Indigenous writers, directors, below the line crew, that sort of thing. So we do a lot of stuff where we can help them get to their next stage, and so I'm more than happy to do that. So every opportunity we get, I'll be in there trying to push that we can get Indigenous crew working, inputting, creating, that sort of thing. So for example, when Mystery Road came to Broome in 2019, on the front, from the minute they were sort of coming, I was on to Jowsy and Greer saying, okay, how do we get Indigenous people working with you guys? How do we get them learning the jobs, learning the roles? How do I take people that I've already got a little bit skilled to the next level? whether it's through attachments, whether it's through meaningful jobs in the crew, whether it's through observing, whether, you know, how do we do it? So we're always on about those sort of things, and that's what we want to do. We want to grow our sector and work the thing. I suppose my couple of little bits of advice to any emerging producers is keep at it. Some days you feel like thinking, oh, you know, I'm working 22 hours a day and I'm not getting any pay, but it will all pay off in the end. It's worth it. Never underestimate the importance of your networks, especially when you're working regionally or remotely. You know, it is such a collaborative industry, and nobody makes a film by themselves. You always have a whole crew, a whole team around you, and so it's just so important to be able to talk to people, bounce things off people. So I mean, every person I've ever met, I make sure that I stay in touch with them, even if it's just an occasional Facebook message saying, "How you going? Love what I just saw you put on Facebook the other day," or "Loved your show I saw the other night." Because I mean, it can get very lonely when you're sitting in a remote area, and so we want to be able to. You need to be able to have people to talk to vent to just bounce things off and say, "Well, what do you guys think of this?" So. Yeah, I always try and stay in touch with, you know, everyone I know, and never am ashamed to ask people for help, ask people for assistance, ask people for their opinion. And I'm always open to that, people asking me back too. So I always put my hand up when people are wanting mentoring support. If you need a hand, just, you know, give me a ring. Happy to talk to people about that. So, and that is collaboration. You know, that's what it's all about. So, yeah, I don't know what else I can really say at the moment. Happy to answer questions, but I do have a show reel of sort of some of the stuff we do. Like I said, we basically do a lot of Indigenous content. Outside of Indigenous content, we do a lot of sort of local Broome, Kimberley type content. So, and obviously to pay the bills, sometimes we do some corporate stuff. So in our show reel, you'll see there's a little bit of corporate stuff. But yes, that's what we do. So Ken, maybe we can play the show reel.
We come from Dreamtime. It was a silent world. The first sound was created to wake everything up.
Today, we tell our story in many ways. Ours is an oral tradition.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jodie. And it was really great to hear you talking about working regionally and also the importance of partnering with Indigenous practitioners and companies. I also thought you mentioned two really great things that we'll come back to, which is the importance of networks and also just how producers keep at it when it can be a lonely and long journey. So we'll come back to those 2 points. Our next speaker is Taryn Lafar, known as Pinky, who is a producer and writer who descends from the Bardi and Jabba Jabba nations. Her filmmaking credits include Who's Painting This Wajana, Bingo, Rainforest Warriors, On Country Kitchen, numerous Our Stories for NITV, KGB, which is available at the moment on ABC iView, and Our Law, which is currently on Netflix. She was a 2019 Ones to Watch for the Screen Producers Australia and was subsequently announced as Screen Forever's SBS First Glance Prize winner. Taryn was also selected for the Indigenous Producers Program that Jodie mentioned through Screen Australia and also completed their Developing the Developer program. In 2020, Taryn's latest co-production feature anthology Red was announced, as was her TV dramedy series development for Tata Detective, and I'm so happy to be working with Taryn and the project. In 2021, Pink Pepper is working on a comedy series Old Mate, the documentary Our Law, an augmented reality and companion documentary Walking with Fanny Balbook, as well as Red and Tata Detective. So welcome, busy woman.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Miss Lois and Jodie Bell. You just made me homesick. I was nearly crying. So hi, everybody. My name is Taryn Lafar, affectionately called Pinky, and I descend from the Bardi and Jabba Jabba nations, which is actually north of Broome. But most of my family are the Hunter Torres mobs, and heaps of us are based in Broome, and that's where my mummy was born, rest in peace. So I actually come from the visual arts world. My mum was the first Aboriginal art gallery owner in WA many, many moons ago. And I was actually focused on working sort of in the visual arts sector. And I'd left Broome and come down. I will acknowledge that I'm on Whadjuk country in Perth at the moment. And I came down from Broome to Perth to study at WAPA, the arts management course. And I happened to be seeing a boom operator at the time. And so I wasn't that curious about the industry at that stage. But then because I'm so affiliated with the arts, my 4-year-old daughter at the time, so I'm here to talk to single parents and to mothers that you can do it too. But that my 4-year-old daughter had seen a graffiti of a Wandjina, which is a symbol from the Kimberleys, graffitied on a Perth here on an underpass here in Perth. And that sort of piqued my interest about the screen industry being a potential for what I was doing and investigating. So at around the same time, so there was an initiative, and that's very much my pathway into the industry. So there was Deadly Yarns, which was an initiative between ABC and Screen West, and FTI, which is no longer with us, Film and TV Institute. So I went to them and I said, I'm not familiar with this industry. I have no idea what is what. And I went into that as a writer director. And I made my first documentary at 8 minutes in about 2006. And because I come from the visual arts and I didn't read my contract properly, I realised that writer-directors have to negotiate their rights to own things. And that didn't sit well with me. So sort of from then on, I decided that producing would be something that I would pursue down the track. But because I too didn't go to film school, I needed to learn on the job. And this is where my ex comes into play as the boom operator. I sneakily read a script which was on at his house on the desk, and it was called The Circuit. And I read a few pages and I realised I'm highly politicised as well. And I realised this is the first Indigenous lead character in a TV series ever. There was a phone number on the front of that script. And I called the production office and had a yarn. It was very brave and maybe stupid. And I called them up and I went in for a meeting. And I was offered an opportunity to work, because I come from the arts and I actually have some skills around wardrobe. So they kind of offered me a couple of opportunities. And I said yes. They said casting, art department or wardrobe. And this was as an attachment, which is the equivalent of a work experience. And I said, I'm good with casting. I'm from Broome. I'll do casting. And that literally was my entry point into the industry proper, where I got to see, documentary is obviously very small and very housed in, with only a handful of crew. But then I got to see this big beast in action, and the sense of pride and inclusion, and the way that I saw, I was into music as well growing up. And when I saw a DOP, a director of photography, look at the sound recordist or the boom operator, it was like this, all this language was happening, unspoken language about what people needed to cover. And I found that really exciting and fascinating. So I did some casting work there on the circuit, and that was a very privileged experience, and that won Human Rights Awards. So that was really talking my language regarding Indigenous representation on screen, but also Indigenous above the line, so writer, directors, producers. So that was many moons ago. That was in 2006. And because I didn't know anything, really, it was such a big, brand new world from the arts sector. I decided to really pursue casting because I thought that would be a good opportunity to meet, and engage with performers and actors, and to tap into the people that I already knew. But it was a way to sort of be in the world and to learn on the job. So from 2006, I did casting on Brand New Day, Jan Damara's War, Mad Bastards, which I was also, I was attached to David Jowsey as a producer's attachment on Mad Bastards, and I was attached to Robin Kershaw on Brand New Day. And those are the sort of projects that I did as I was trying to learn. And on every production, whether you go on as an extra or an attachment, always leave every production with a couple of phone numbers of people you like and want to work with down the track, and maintain those relationships, because you will always meet people that are generous and that, that could be good connections for you down the track. So that's always my bit of advice. No matter if you're a performer, producer, director, whatever, that's really important to take advantage of all of those opportunities around the attachment process. And attachments facilitated through screen agencies, obviously for us in WA at Screen West, and that's how you start to really build relationships. So obviously you want to sign up to Screen West, or I'm in WA, your state agencies, sign up to newsletters. You want to go for your agencies, Screen Australia, ABC, SBS, AFTRS. You want to start informing yourself about what's happening in the world. Follow people's work, watch heaps of Australian content is the other sort of bits of advice there. But anyway, I'll come back to that in a moment. But as I also thought producing, because it was a bit of an isolated world in regards, and I could be flexible as a parent, and working with, it allowed me to work from home as well. So it was something that fit for my particular personal situation at the time. But basically initiatives, and now is the time for women, LGBTQI, obviously Indigenous storytelling, disability sector. There's heaps of initiatives coming out at the moment, regional and remote as well. So that through those signing up to those agencies and those other resources, that's where you're going to find out about what's happening. And usually on the websites, most of the agencies and Screen Australia tells you what's in production, what's in what's been, there's lots of information about what's coming up. So you want to start doing your legwork early if you want to try and get an attachment onto projects. But I work across documentary and scripted. So I made that first documentary as a writer-director, realised I didn't own any rights to it. And then as the sort of years progressed, a few years later, after I'd done a bit of work in the casting world, I went for another initiative with a sister girl and writer-director friend of mine, Kelly Cross, through Screen Australia, and we made our first half hour. I did my first short film with her, Bingo, which is about gambling grannies, and then we made Rainforest Warriors together because her and I had created a good relationship, writer-director and myself as producer, and she was a single mum as well, and we worked together and supported each other in that way. So then from there, and they were both broadcast on ABC, those two programs, and then for a bunch of years I got no love. Which was, I lost my mother around that time, so I took a little bit of time off, and I wasn't getting any love from Screen West, which was, a difficult thing to grasp, but I was determined, and I think that's the other straight, beautiful determination is the only way this stuff happens. But I kept plodding along, going for things, and as Jodie said before, talk to people, your colleagues and your allies, just to help support you through some of those rough times, but keep your finger on the pulse. And if you're not getting initiatives, keep watching stuff, keep informing yourself about how the industry is moving. But then I've done a bunch of different things. I've managed a preservation and archival program called Indigenous Community Stories for a while. So that sort of kept me in the space for a bit. Very proud of that initiative from WA here. But I also couldn't stay away from the arts. So I was tour managing and company managing for dance companies and trying to do 50 things. And it wasn't until because I was getting some support from Screen Australia, but not from Screen West, and that didn't sit really great with me. And then I did a bunch of NITV half 15-minuters, and that's great. That's the perfect space. Initiatives and low budget, short time, 5 to 15 minutes, and it's a really great space to learn because there's less pressure on you as an emerging producer to get to get these projects on. It's less of a, I swear a bit too, sorry guys, but I'm not going to swear now. It's a less painful beast if you don't put too much pressure on yourself too early in the game. The other thing I think is a really a good thing to do is, if you can't, work with, create relationships. Maybe you want to work in production management to get a bit of an understanding about how things work. Or, my route was through casting because I'm interested in scripted work. But definitely try and take advantage of any of those opportunities to get a leg in the door in any way necessary, because that's how you learn what production is like proper, and that's where you meet people as well. Rainforest Warriors, a bunch of those short NITV initiatives, and then I made a 6 times half hour series called On Country Kitchen. I am the worst cook in the world, but that series was about 2 men in the kitchen, and I was like, yes, I'm in. So we did that a bunch of years ago, and because it was a difficult process, I was still grieving for my mum. I decided to go back to Broome for a while, and I just spent a year off, and I didn't do anything to do with the industry, but that basically reinvigorated me. And in 2018, I cut off all my arts work and I went hell for leather and went, I'm going to give 1 year of giving it my all for producing. And I went for everything. Indigenous producer program, developing the developer, ones to watch. And around that time as well, I produced KGB, which is a web series and an initiative as well. And KGB is a 5 times 6 minutes web series that's available on, I'll put the links up in a minute. That KGB is available on ABC iView, and that was working with my cousins as emerging writer directors and a really established production company in Perth who specialised in comedy. Mad Kids at the time, they now have split and gone into some different directions. But that was wonderful, growing that further relationship with non-Indigenous filmmakers in Perth in collaboration with those guys. And I'm actually developing Old Mate, which is a 47,000-year-old superhero, and I'm developing that with actor Clarence Ryan and another actor, Renato Fabriti, and Lauren Elliott of now Galactic Baby, but previously she was Mad Kids with KGB. So we created a great relationship back then on that project, and we won with the KGB. We won the WA Screen Award for Best Web Series last year, and the fact that it's still on, this amount of time later shows that there's audience out there for that. And then, how long am I going, you guys? I'm a talker as well. I actually went to Melbourne to AIDC, the Australian International Documentary Conference, and bumped into someone from Perth who just made a series on the most multicultural police station in WA, in Mirrabooka. And he said to me, "Taryn, do you know about Warracoona?" And before he'd finished his sentence about what was happening there, basically was Warracoona was the home of the first Indigenous-run police station in Australia. Before he finished the sentence, I said, "I'm in." And within 2 weeks, we were developing that project. And that too was through an initiative that we got that financing and broadcast deal with NITV and Screen West back in 2019. And then we were fortunate enough to create a deal with Netflix last year. And now that Our Law is available on Netflix ANZ at the moment. So that was a bit of a coup for us. Sam Field of Periscope Pictures and I, we're currently in development for a 6 times half-hour series of Our Law. And we're looking at policing of Indigenous people through the lens of Indigenous police officers and their communities. And I just got back from Roebourne last night, hence my tired look. So that's all looking good. So we'll be in production for that later in the year. And as Ms. Lois said, with the bit of advice I would say regarding relationships and my connection with Lois, Lois was my mentor for Once to Watch. And when we were, she was introducing me to people when I was over in Sydney for the Screen Forever event. I realised how I could see life in her eyes introducing this project to people, and other people were responding really well as well. But I made no decisions about who I might want to, get into bed with, so to speak, on this project. Got back to Perth and woke up one morning and I was like, it's Lois. It's Lois who I should be asking to work with. So we started developing Tata Detective, which is a 6 times 1 hour crime procedural last year about an Indigenous arts and culture appropriation detective, which is a very exciting and new project. But yeah, a bunch of stuff on the slate. Deadly Love, a rom-com a co-pro between Ireland and Australia. Tata Detective, as I've mentioned, with Lois. Walking with Fanny Bulbrook is an augmented reality that I'm working on, which is about one of the first freedom fighter Noongar people in Perth. And because I live in Perth, I always, I'm from North and I'll head up back that way at some stage. But I will always work with Noongar people, especially while I'm living and working on their country. So it's a deep importance to me to show my respect that way. Red I'm working with Ms. Jodie Bell on developing that wonderful 8 times 10-minute one-shot feature film project. And I'm also have a short film on the go with Maine Wyatt, who was the first Indigenous actor on Neighbours. He's got a huge profile. He was recently, announced as one of Time Magazine's top 100 people in the world to watch. So working with people who are pushing the same ante about representation and Indigenous voices, they're the people I want to work with. But I'm an advocate and a supporter of women filmmakers, all of the diversity sector. I'm always available for a yarn, and I'm a supporter. I can't help it. I'm a mum, auntie, a granny, sister. So I'm definitely a person that understands that we need to support each other as women in the industry. The other things I want to say: create relationships with not only your agencies, but go to events. If you can go to Screen Forever, AIDC, go to any festivals. If they're local, there'll always be commissioning editors there, people connected to broadcasters. Get some business cards. Time's up. Oh, damn. Sorry, much more to say, but I'm going to flick you guys my email, and I'm available for yarns should you need. And good luck, everyone. Persistence is the bloody key.
So much, Taryn. Amazing. And some great tips there about get some experience, make connections, and that persistence is so important. Just before I introduce Joanna, I just want to remind everyone that you can ask questions. There's some fantastic questions coming up already using the Q&A tab that's down the bottom of your screen there. And you can vote for other people's questions if they're similar to yours. And I'm keeping an eye on those, and we'll throw to those straight after we hear from Joanna. But now I'm so thrilled to introduce Joanna Werner, who has an extraordinary and brilliant career with over 20 years experience in film and television. She's produced over 94 hours and 173 episodes of television and a feature film, all of which have sold extensively around the world. Her work has been defined with consistent acclaim, with multiple ACTA awards and Logies and 3 Emmy nominations. Joanna has amassed multiple credits and an array of internationally acclaimed work, most recently the Netflix original Clickbait, Riot for the ABC, Secret City for Foxtel, as well as the 2-time Emmy-nominated Dance Academy. Her upcoming projects include The Newsreader for the ABC, Surviving Summer, a teen surf series for Netflix. Joanna has also taken a leading role in the industry itself, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. She's also the chair of Screen Australia's Gender Matters Task Force. Welcome, Joanna, and thank you so much, and another very busy person.
Thanks very much, Lois. Hopefully my audio is all okay. I am on location in Wadawurrung country. I'm in Anglesea on the Great Ocean Road, and we're shooting the teen surf show Surviving Summer. And our office is at the Anglesea Surf Lifesaving Club, which is amazing, but it doesn't have many spaces that are quiet. So I'm actually in the attached restaurant. So it opens at 3, so hopefully it's not going to be too busy. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Whilst it's intimidating to speak to a lot of people you can't see, it's probably less intimidating than being up on a stage. And we didn't all have to fly to be there, so there are some advantages. As Lois said, I am a film and television producer. Much more, I am a mum. I am a mum of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I have a 22 and 20-year-old stepson and daughter. So it's a busy house. I run my own production company, Werner Film Productions, which I opened in 2008. And yeah, it's a busy time at the moment. I wanted to just talk you through, I guess, my experience of how I got to become, my pathway to being a producer, because I think everybody's pathway to being a producer is completely different, as you would have heard from our fabulous speakers, their inspiring stories of how they got to where they are. There is absolutely no cookie cut away. So I grew up outside of a tiny town called Gunbow, which is 300 people, which is outside of Chuka, which is on the Murray River. We were lucerne farmers. My dad was an engineer and then a truck driver, and my mum's a teacher, so there was absolutely no media connection in the family whatsoever. I did math science at high school because my pretty terrible country high school didn't really have many other options, and certainly media wasn't one. But I did go, and so I was going to do engineering at university was my plan. But I went to the open days at universities, and media studies really at RMIT really took my fancy. I deferred from after year 12 for a year, and I did a television and video traineeship with the Rockestead, if anyone remembers Rockestead. Sadly they're not around anymore, but they were amazing. And so that was a year of experience of making a TV special for the Rockestead, which was really good experience. And then I went to uni. I did my 3 years at RMIT, and it was a fantastic course. And really, without that, for me, I wouldn't have had any entry point into the industry. Just as I said, I just didn't know anyone, wasn't connected in any other way. And so during that time, I did short films, and then volunteered to produce short films at the VCA. And that was just baptism by fire. I still think the hardest things I've ever done as producing short films. So hats off to anyone out there who is doing that now. Believe me, it gets easier. It is so much easier to produce a $35 million show than it is to produce a $300,000 show, or, you know, if you're lucky to get $300,000, than to produce a $30,000 show or a show just made by your credit card. They are hard slogs, but it's absolutely where I learnt at running. You can only learn to produce by producing, and that's just getting in there and doing it. It absolutely is very hard work, and when you're doing the short films and you're the caterer and the locations manager and the production manager and the producer and the everything, it is hard going. But it led to opportunities. After university, I just did any job I could. I was a runner. I was a cable wrangler at the basketball. I was an extreme sports camera woman. Whatever job and experience I could find. And then, very lucky, something was advertised, and you very rarely see that. And it was a traineeship it was a trainee producer at Jonathan Schiff Productions, and Jonathan Schiff had produced Ocean Girl and a huge number of kids shows that I'd grown up with, and so I was extremely excited to get that role. And the reason I got the job, I heard, because there were 500 applicants, because those opportunities don't come up very often, but it was because I was out there doing my own thing. I was making short films, and I was so I'd sort of demonstrated that I guess I was out there trying to do it. So I think having just being a self-starter and pushing to get things done, I think it certainly helped me to get that opportunity. Whilst I was working for Jonathan Schiff, I worked there for a number of years, and on every show I sort of worked my way up to get a better credit and more responsibility and learn more on the job. During that time, probably the most important thing that happened to me, as well as getting that experience, was when my first producing credit was when I was 27 on H2O, Just Add Water, which is amazing to me now that it's now a classic, because it just seems like yesterday. It's about teenage mermaids. If you haven't seen it, it's all over Netflix. And during that time, I became really good friends with the casting assistant, and and as the other speakers have said, it's so important about who you meet on these shows. So the casting assistant and I connected, and we got drunk at the pre-shoot drinks. And at about 2 a.m, she asked me what show I'd make if I could make any show in the world. And I said I wanted to make a show about a girl from the country who gets in the top ballet school. And her name was Sam Strauss, and she didn't have any writing credits, but she thought I was joking, because that's the show that she had been creating for years. And she gave me the script, and it was the best thing I've ever read. So I optioned that, and I had to, fight. She had an agent, and I had to fight to say why I was the right person to produce that show, even though I hadn't had any other credits or didn't have my production company. But I knew that I was the right one to make that show, and so we worked on it. I optioned it. We worked on it together for a number of years. I quit my job with Jonathan Schiff to start my own production company, and then we pitched it to the ABC, pitched it to my contacts at ZDFE in Germany that I'd made through working with Jonathan Schiff, and then we got the show financed. Actually, one of the smart things I did do though was to approach the Australian Australian Children Television Foundation to come on board as EPs, and they were a huge support, but it also meant that the ABC and our distributor had real confidence that I had the support behind me so that they knew that I would deliver the show. So I do think that's great advice, and it still remains great advice. If you're getting started and there's any concerns that the network or distributors might have, getting an experienced executive producer, and whether that's a production company or a person or an entity like the ACTF, that certainly helped me. So we made Dance Academy, we went on to make 3 series, and then we made the film, and I have got the trailer. It's just a really short trailer of the film that sort of sums up the series, but because it was the first thing that my company produced, it really means a lot. So I might throw to Ken to get that screen.
I'm saying I can never dance again.
Tara, I watched you learn to walk again.
I want my life back.
Everything hurts every day, and I already know I'll never be as good as you are.
So that was Dance Academy. Since then, I've made the children's series Ready for This with Black Pillar Films. That was a co-pro, and that was a really special film, really special series. I produced my first adult show was Secret City. I then made Riot, which was the first adult series. It was actually a film, a telemovie with my own company, Secret City. I produced with Matchbox. I then went back working with Matchbox again. We made Clickbait, which was my first US credit, and then we just finished, and then the pandemic came and it threw all schedules out, and so crazily we were shooting Clickbait at the same time as The Newsreader, which is a 6x1 hour for the ABC, which is very exciting. We've just locked all the episodes and I'm thrilled about it. And now we're here in Anglesea shooting Surviving Summer, which is 10.5 hours. I just wanted to quickly go through what I see as a producer does. This is for drama. This is my process. So for any show, finding the concept is the first one, and that might be that you create it yourself, as I did with Surviving Summer, and then work with writers, or it might be that you meet a fantastic writer, as I did with Dance Academy, and you option the work and then work with them. It's an extremely collaborative thing, and the most fundamentally important thing for me is the working with the creator and the collaborating and the writers. Then once you've got that underway and maybe have a pilot script and a pitch document, pitching to broadcasters, to distributors, maybe to other production companies if you need to team up. And then putting finance plan together, and every show is different for that, then that's the slog, and that can take years. It took me 2 years to finance the Newsreader, and that's fast by some comparisons. So finalising the finance plan, getting that money all confirmed, and then getting the green light. And then you're into production. So scripting all the time, contracting all the time, finding the directors, very key, crewing your HODs. I start with casting director, line producer, DOP, production designer. They're sort of the first ones on board that help to understand this, for me to understand the scope of the show. Casting, and then you're in pre-shoot, post, delivery, publicity, sales, and then hopefully glory and everybody loves the show and you're proud of it. My 10 minutes is up. Really lovely to talk to you all. Maybe in the question and answer we can talk a little bit about being a producer from the regions and remote Australia, because I think now is the best time ever. I consider myself a regional producer now. I've relocated down to the coast and not living in Melbourne anymore. The pandemic has had some advantages. But throwing back to you, Lois, and thanks very much for being here today, and look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Joanna. It's so inspiring to hear from you, and you have answered one of the key question there, which is what does a producer actually do? So that's great. Thank you. I'm going to ask anyone on the panel who would like to answer this. If someone is just starting out and they haven't had any funding yet, how can they sort of access their first funding? Anyone want to begin?
Well, I suppose I could maybe answer that on an Indigenous perspective. Is that NITV runs about every 12 months. They have an initiative called Our Stories, which is basically I think it's currently $13,000 or $15,000 for up to 15-minute story. And that's a really good way to get in. Like people have said in the others when they were talking, working on low budget really makes you think really hard about the story, what you're going to show on screen, and how you're going to get the best onto the screen with that small amount of money. And so that for Indigenous producers, that's definitely a really good step in to the industry.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jodie. I'd also just suggest for people who are starting out to think more broadly. And I think, Nikki, you've had some sort of less traditional types of funding through community and arts organisations. Do you want to give any advice?
Yeah, it's so hard. I think when you don't have enough experience yet to access the funding from Screen Australia or Film Vic, they've made it easier now, and the bar is set much lower. But I'd say there you can look at councils. Local councils sometimes have these small one-off grants every now and then, the ones who are arts friendly, to apply for those. And Creative Victoria, I know from my own experience, they have a few rounds of funding every year that are kind of all encompassing and not just the arts, it's for screen as well. It's called the Creators Fund, and you can use that to do a bit of research as well and develop your project at the same time. State Library of Victoria also has a whole bunch of fellowships at a certain point of the year. I can't remember when it was, but they do offer like a crazy amount. It was like 16 fellowships or something for people to use the resources at State Library, and people would be writing novels, they'd be doing research projects. The one I got was a creative fellowship. So you could use, it was $15,000 to use. They gave you a desk to yourself. You could use the resources in the collections at the library to research for your project. And I used it to research a musical, which is still not completed yet. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, those are what I've had experience with.
That's great. And I guess the other options are, I suppose, just researching every sort of funding out there that sometimes community banks. I know someone who's recently got some funding through a community banking sponsor, and also small business sponsors. Or the other way is to partner with more experienced who can who does have the credentials to access the state or federal agency funding. A similar question that's come in that's got a lot of votes, which is again for people who are starting out on their pathway, is how do tips on connecting with industry mentors and finding attachment opportunities?
I would say taking, so the latest attachments that I've had on projects have come through Film Victoria's attachment scheme, so getting on their registry, and I think it's you have to apply, and and so it's a process to get on that, but then that's fantastic because for production companies, Film Victoria have really brought together people who are really interested in that particular area, and so you've got an immediate shortlist. So it's a great way for producers to access people through that, and I'm sure other state funding bodies have similar schemes. Prior to that, I've also had attachments just reach out personally. So when you see that a show is coming up, so keeping a track of what's in development with Screen Australia. Screen Australia announces all the shows that they're developing. They also, all of the state and federal funding bodies announce what shows are going into pre-production, so getting in there as early as you can and just applying. I surprisingly have not as many people as you think apply to production companies for attachments, and being really specific about the attachment you want. If somebody says, I just want to come on the film and do anything, it's much less appealing than, I want to be a continuity person, I really want an attachment with that, I can see myself getting a job after that if I have this experience, and that's something that I'd say yes to if I could in a heartbeat. We absolutely want to help people take that step, and if there's a clear pathway to that and we can help, and we being producers, then I think so many producers are keen to help people make that step.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, all the state agencies I think have all initiatives, although like registers, and also just a little plug for Screenworks has a regional crew database for northern New South Wales that you can put yourself up on, and so that you can get in any attachments and employment opportunities on productions in this part of the world. A lot of people who've registered previously expressed interest in finding out about different types of funding, and we also have a question here from Claudia about different sorts of funding streams. So I sort of just did a quick what I call the financing pie. There's the market money from the marketplace, which is either an Australian and often usually now an international partner as well. So that's a broadcaster or a distributor or some sort of platform. There are the federal and the state agencies, which is you can access their websites. There's lots of information available. There is industry partners, so that could be like post-production companies or equipment hire companies, and sort of private investment. Would anyone else like to sort of add to that in terms of accessing different types of funding?
Sorry, you go, Terry.
I just in regards to one of my, depending on what your content is, obviously, but I've had support from tourism bodies in regards to some of the work that I've, because WA, we don't have a studio. One little Gammon one little Slack one in ABC down in Perth here, but we pride ourselves on, shooting on location. But that's definitely, an opportunity that way as well.
There's some fantastic resources on the Screen Australia website. They've got a section called Getting Started, and it's got headings are Find Your Voice, which is about choosing the types of productions you want to make. I'm going to come back to that. Find Your Audience, which is finding that market partner who can get your project to an audience, but also hopefully give you some money to make it. Find your team, your mentors and your champions. We've been talking about that. Find out about the industry, and this section on Screen Australia's website includes links to all of the different agencies, all of the guilds, fantastic information there. Find opportunities, so that's the different sorts of initiatives. They've got a whole listing of the different sorts of initiatives that are out there with different agencies, and also how you get those attachment opportunities. And then find distribution. So I encourage you all to have a look at that, and Jeannie's up on the link here to how to access that information. So I think that that first question about finding your voice, there's a question here for you, Taryn, but it's how do you choose the type of projects that you want to make, or and I'm going to ask each of you to respond quickly to that question.
I mean, it has progressed and changed over my career, but I kind of, I've definitely marked down what my values are. What is important to me. So kind of, spelling out what is important to you. So for me, it's about supporting women, supporting new talent, Indigenous WA stories and things like that. So that sort of helps decide things. As sort of my career progresses, I'm still into supporting, emerging and new filmmakers, but I really am looking to engage with people who know what they want to do. And I don't want to be pulling teeth anymore. That's a bit painful. It is, so for me it's about the story, it's about the people, it's about the locations, and it's about the marketplace, whether there's room, whether it's in the zeitgeist right now, whether there's room for it right now, whether its timing is important as well. And that's why those relationships with your markets are important, just to see how they feel, because it could be a matter of sitting on something for a bit longer and then pressing on it when it becomes a bit more, so it's about being savvy to not being disappointed if stuff doesn't happen straight away, but sometimes you might want to sit on that for a little bit longer and wait for the right opportunity. So it's sort of but as I said before, I'm arts management, so I kind of feel like I was born to support creatives, and it's also how I'm learning how to producing as well. For me, is my way of having proprietary over my creative work that's upcoming, you know. So it was about housing that and working with that.
Thank you. What about you, Joanna? How do you choose your projects?
Really varied ways. With Dance Academy, as I said, I just happened to meet the right person at the right time. We had the same story I wanted to tell, and she was incredibly talented writer, and so it was just sold. I once did, as I got a Screen Australia Enterprise grant, which was brilliant, and I did a calls for concept, and we got inundated, which was fantastic, and out of those shortlisted about 20 and then optioned about 6, and Riot was made out of that, and just some fantastic contacts that I met with new creatives I hadn't worked with before. And when we were going through and just selecting the shows, it was really just, what do I want to watch firstly, what do I want to make, and what do I think that I'm the right person to make, because they've also had shows come to me which I know would be brilliant, but I'm just not the right person to do it. I want to make sure that I can support the creator and provide something and value add, because every person that you get to work on a show adds another something to the show, and so the sum of its parts. So I just want to make sure it's something that I can add to, and yeah, really varied. I created Surviving Summer, and for better or worse, it's something that I wanted to do, but it's and then worked with brilliant writers, and then on my future shows, likes of the Newsreader, I was just very lucky that very talented writer came to me with a concept that was just brilliant, and so I was just lucky that he chose to come to me. And then on other things, I've had to pitch my bum off for to get. So got playing Betty Bow in development with Stan, and it was, a lot of people wanted it, and a brilliant writer had a great take on it, and I just went for it. And in pitching to a writer or a creator, just again to saying why you're the right person to do it. So just that connection to the material, because I go with my stomach all the time. It's the leading thing.
And Jodie?
I suppose for me, it's more, my main thing is whether, obviously, if it's an Indigenous story with Indigenous authorship. So I won't go into a project that's trying to tell an Indigenous story with no Indigenous creators on it apart from myself. Emerging, I suppose, our goal is around, trying to grow our sector, and so I always look to that. And so if there's always a strong element of that in a project, or the possibility of having that, and then obviously also stuff that I can do from home really, or from locally in WA more than anything else. So yeah.
Thank you. And Nikki, what about you?
For me, I think I want to support culturally diverse voices and stories about underrepresented communities, and so it's like Pinky, it's also about my values as well in choosing projects, and also working with people that I like, and the stories that move also beyond just representation for representation's sake. Like, I'm looking for projects usually that are both entertaining and resonate at the same time too. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it's just on that, just what Nikki's saying, I suppose, to all you emerging producers that are listening. Someone once said to me, is like, it is a bit like a marriage going into making a film. And so you really got to be careful and do your due diligence, and do your grow your relationship before you commit on a project, because you don't want to be stuck with someone for 5 years doing a project that after about a month you realize you've got completely different values, you completely see the world differently, and you're never going to see eye to eye.
Often
the divorce is a lot harder out of a film.
I don't know if everyone else on the panel has had this as well, someone approaching them asking to be a producer and submit an application with them when the application's due like 2 days away. Yeah, that's always a bit tough, but because producers are always on the project at the very beginning all the way to the end, and that might be years of work, it's really important that you do know the people you're working with and you do trust them.
Thank you. That's great advice all around. Now, Sally Ann's asked, how, as an emerging director, how would you advise to meet and find producers and emerging producers to collaborate with? I'm going to answer that one. I just think, Sally Ann, is to look at projects that you love and that speak to you, and then find out who's been producing them. Try and find producers with similar sort of values and passions as you. And I guess also go to that Screen Australia section of Getting Started and look at all of the industry events that are there, and sort of get out and use that as a way to meet people, and also obviously webinars like this. Okay, next up I'm going to ask about a question. I think it's this is a really interesting question from Robin Williams. It's, as an emerging producer, how do you balance low budget or no budget projects and not wanting to rip people off or rip off emerging artists and not being able to pay them?
I guess I can answer that question. A lot of low budget, no budget projects. It is really hard. I think through making some of the web series I've had, I've ended up like using all the goodwill from people around me. One of the strategies I've tried doing, trying not to, if I have to work in the low budget, no budget space, is to spread out the shoot. So people aren't committing weeks at a time. It might be 2 days here and there. And then that means, you know, you can swap and change. There's a lot more crewing involved because you have to find different people to fill in the roles. But at least that helps you get the project made without having to take away someone's ability to work for a long period of time. At some point, I said to myself that I'm not going to make another project without paying people, even if it's just, you know, to cover expenses and travel costs and things like that, so they're not completely out of pocket. But it's hard to keep doing that. Yeah, and I guess sometimes I make the decision to do a no budget or low budget project to be able to support other emerging talent as well.
And it's the promise of the future as well. That's right. The people that you work with on your short films, when you get a chance, you absolutely get them on a paying job. So it's, and it's just building up those contacts. So pay it forward or pay it back.
Yeah, I second that entirely. I second that. You know, you want to create a relationship where it's a bit of a quid pro quo, where you're going to get them a credit and some money on the next work. You know, you're growing up together, sort of thing. So I think I totally advocate for that. You want to work with people in the future. Sorry, Jodes.
No, I was going to say also relationships is also the very key thing. So a lot of, really good heads of department, things like that, are happy to jump onto a low budget, no budget project for a couple of days in between their jobs, you know what I mean? So, but to have that relationship, you've got to put yourself out there, go to those sort of screen agency industry functions, meet people, just keep in contact, and then you can, have a drink with them. And the other thing is, if you've got any budget at all, never underestimate the good of catering. If you feed them well, they'll stay.
100%.
And Nana, who makes good sausage rolls, is very handy.
That's right.
People well. We're nearly out of time, so I know that there's a lot of questions coming in. There's one question I'll quickly answer, which is about, it's a very complex question, which is about optioning, the process of optioning and rights and that sort of thing. And I suggest that Screen Producers Australia have some fantastic programs and resources and business advice for emerging producers. But would anyone else like to just quickly, I'd like to talk about well-being, and we've all talked about how do you keep at it, how do you keep morale. So just quickly for our last kind of piece of advice to emerging people on the pathway, how do you keep yourself going?
I'll jump in. I absolutely, it's not a sprint. It's a marathon, and some days it's just about. honestly, I think it's about just keep turning up. I keep showing up, keep trying. There are days that you won't feel motivated. Being a producer is tough because nobody tells you you're doing a good job. You have to keep yourself motivated. So it's that's the tricky thing. But just I think the passion for the shows is the thing that keeps you going. So find things that you're passionate about, because that's the only way you're going to keep your motivation to keep showing up.
Sorry, you go, Lois.
Just quick tips on keeping yourself going and looking after yourself in this often long and lonely journey.
I believe in friendships and colleagues and allies, and and particularly as women, we should be working together. There's some, even joining WIFT Australia, your local women in film and TV, because they've got some great opportunities and that are very targeted towards emerging filmmakers as well. I particularly like to get away from computers entirely, and I have 1 day off a week. I used to be a workaholic 7 days. Now I'm strict about 1 day a week. Bit of meditation is good, gardening's good, and dancing.
Beautiful. Anyone else?
Look, just reiterate everything that everyone said, really. Yes.
And I think that really that your networks and the people that you choose to work with are just so important for just keeping each other going as well. Okay.
And we're not saving lives, so you're allowed to give yourself a break. We're not saving lives. It's important to, even though we act like we are, and we put that pressure on ourselves and everyone around us at times. You have to put things into perspective and just go, it's okay to have a day here and there, or to, just be mindful that it is because it's a marathon. You have to keep, be smart about how you treat yourself, because, it can be loveless, thankless, penniless, all those great things. But, determination and sticking with it is key. Going to events and being around others is inspiring, and going to see films in the cinema when you can. Festivals, go to all those things, and be around the community, because that's energy in itself,
Fantastic. Okay, well, our time's up, and I think we might throw Screenworks just to wrap up. But I personally just want to thank you all so much for your generosity and for your great advice for people, for women going on the pathway towards producing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lois. And I think that was a very inspiring and encouraging note to end on. What a brilliant conversation. And I hope that for all you guys who've been watching over the last hour and a half out there, that you've been able to take some inspiration and encouragement from our 4 fabulous speakers and facilitator, who between them have a wealth of experience that we've been able to draw on this afternoon. So I would just like to say thank you very much to our speakers, to Nikki, to Jodie, to Taryn, Pinky, and to Joe, and of course to Lois Randall for being a brilliant moderator today. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.